Well, hello everybody, welcome back to the channel, and here we are with part 3 of the Godzilla box set special presentation, and I'm very excited to head into this very interesting and collectible Godzilla booklet containing a ton of very interesting information. So, I'm going to get right into it, and yeah, this is some really informative material. Poetry After the A-Bomb by J. Haberman. From the scary thuds and mysterious roars that accompany the No Frills titles to the bizarrely poignant final image of the monster. Alone at the bottom of the ocean, Ishiro Honda's 1954 Godzilla is all business and pure dream. Amid a flurry of urgent news bulletin references to nuclear contamination followed, bomb shelters, and the wartime incineration of Nagasaki, a gigantic, hyper-destructive dinosaur lizard rises from the depths of Tokyo Bay. Magnificent and absurd, the humongous radioactive reptile known as Gojira, Godzilla to us, is the great movie monster of the post-World War II period, in part because Honda seems to have conceived this primordial force of nature as a living mushroom cloud. So yeah, so this is getting into, like, this is heavy stuff. This is as a lot of people know, the one of the biggest inspirations for Godzilla was the A-bomb at Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and the situation of World War II itself, and how sensitive of a situation that was. An artistic film came out of this occurrence. Initially, as Donald Ritchie writes in an essay on the representation of Hiroshima in Japanese cinema, the atomic bomb was considered one more catastrophe in a catastrophic war. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were just two of many ruined Japanese cities. The firebombing of Tokyo had been no less horrible. Hiroshima was not an atrocity, but a tragedy. In 1950, Hiroshima, a documentary made up of newsreel clips and several follow-ups, Nagasaki After the Bomb and Pictures of the Atom Bomb, both 1952, conveyed a resigned and elegiac attitude. The same was true of the first feature on the subject. Kenido Shindo's 1952 Children of Hiroshima, a somber melodrama about the after effects of atomic radiation, shot on location in the half-rebuilt city a month after the end of the U.S. occupation, and finished in time for an August 6 Hiroshima Day world premiere. Although popular success in Japan, Children of Hiroshima was criticized as insufficiently anti-American by Japan's left-wing teachers union, which would finance a more polemical movie drawing on the same material shown at Cannes in May 1953. It was overshadowed by the existential powerhouse The Wages of Fear, with its visceral allegory for nuclear obliteration. Children of Hiroshima attracted little foreign attention. Then with the end of the American occupation came two Japan metaphors that would be impossible to ignore. Godzilla and its art house twin Akira Kurosawa's I Live in Fear, 1955, both produced by Toho Studios. With overlapping casts and both articulating a new attitude, namely an acute nuclear anxiety regarding the possibility of collective extinction, or what in his review of I Live in Fear, Parker Tyler calls atomophobia. Interesting term, very interesting term. Addressing nuclear doomsday from the perspective of the only nation in the world to have suffered an atomic bomb and produced in light of the newly developed hydrogen bomb. These movies were highly topical and hence hardly irrational. Radiation was in the air. The United States successfully exploded an H-bomb in late 1952. The Soviets followed a few months later in 1954. The US, the UK, and the USSR were all testing in the Pacific. Japan's experience of atomic weapons would now also include nuclear fallout from this. In March 1954, an American H-bomb test irradiated a 7,000 square mile area around Bikini Atoll. A Japanese fishing trawler, the Daigyu Fukiru Maru Lucky Dragon No. 5, inadvertently cruised within 85 miles of the site and was showered with radioactive ash, and the entire crew developed radiation sickness. This is not surprisingly was a much bigger deal in Japan than in the US, and Godzilla opens with a version of the Daigyu Fukiru Maru incident, with one freighter and then two more vanishing in a sea of flames. It's like a crazy documentary. I Live in Fear, by contrast, opens like a sci-fi cheapster, distinctively weird, moody music, theremin mixed with saxophone, underscoring overhead shots of heedless, perhaps doomed people in the streets. The possibility of nuclear destruction seems present in nearly every scene. I remember watching a few documentaries. One of them was on Godzilla, and one of them was just on Hiroshima and World War II in general, and coming across the story of the fishing trawler, the Lucky Dragon No. 5, and that's a brutal story. I mean, every member of the crew died, and there was very, very mysterious and disturbing-looking burns on these men's bodies. After being exposed to whatever it was they were out there. And there is definitely references to this incident in the Godzilla 1954 film, which, if you know the story, you can pick up right away upon viewing. Each in its own way, Godzilla and I Live in Fear introduced the idea of a post-nuclear monster, or mutant, in popular mythology. Mutant is the term and the metaphor for those changes nuclear weapons inflict upon our species. Not just sickness and deformity, but mutated consciousness. For Kurosawa, child survivor of the 1923 Tokyo-Yokohama earthquake, which killed an estimated 140,000 people, the atomic bomb was less a political issue than a psychological problem. His protagonist, Kishi Nakajima, a successful industrialist and the head of a large family, is played by Toshiro Mifune as a kind of cracked King Lear, or rather a combination of Lear and the Fool. Mifune contorts his face like a kabuki mask, and there's a simian quality to his fearful, hypervigilant posture. Tyler compares the old man's transformation to that of Kafka's Gregor Sama, a dreaded stranger in his own house, refused to pleading with his family to flee with him to Brazil. Finally, he creates his own Holocaust, destroying his victory. As Mifune's character articulated society's repressed fears, Kurosawa showed that post-nuclear Japan had perhaps become Nakajima, was an us. Godzilla, however, was an it. Honda showed what post-nuclear Japan had and could overcome. The film allowed Japanese audiences to eat their cake and have it. While I Live in Fear was a box office failure, Godzilla was tremendously successful. Its spectacle of total destruction externalized what might be taking place inside the Atmophobe's fevered brain. At once audaciously lurid and fearsomely somber, Godzilla was its own sort of mutant, and even something of show business H-bomb. It initially seemed a Japanese imitation of the American film The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, 1953, also incorporating aspects of King Kong, re-released in 1952, and even more successful than in 1933. But Godzilla was also something new. The first Japanese monster sci-fi film, as well as the most expensive movie ever made. In that country, it cost almost $1 million, 10 times the amount of the average Japanese feature. In some ways, Godzilla was a patriotic movie. Japan's post-war rebirth, economic miracle, and reassertion of a national self in a super colossal package as popular entertainment. It was a break from the movie industry's long period of mobilization when it served first Japanese militarism and then the presumed interests of the American occupiers. And it was a monster hit. This thing could not die. Godzilla appeared in 28 sequels over 40 years, battling King Kong himself in 1962. And then there was Godzilla's progeny, the giant Mothra, the monstrous pterodactyl Rodan, three-headed Ghidorah, the smog monster. In 1956, the American rights to Godzilla were acquired by Joseph E. Levine, who re-released it in a re-edited, dubbed version titled Godzilla King of the Monsters, which would be shown all over the world. Levine cut 40 minutes from Honda's movie, including references to Nagasaki, contaminated food, and wartime bomb shelters, and shot nearly as much new material, adding a narrative framework that provided an American perspective. As though there are not enough monsters coming from Hollywood, New York Times critic Bosley Crowther began his review of what he deemed an incredibly awful film. Columnist Walter Winchell was more charitable, writing that several episodes are bonsai-worthy. Neither man seemed to grasp the implications of a Japanese movie on the subject of nuclear annihilation. So that's what I was saying basically in my review before, is some people really had issues. And like I said, of course, from what we've read so far, there had to have been, some underhanded political stuff going on at the time, especially with all the conflicts at the time. But still, from an artistic perspective of the film, as it clears in here, it does take away from some of the impact of the original movie, but at the end of the day, there are political reasons for that, but there are also artistic reasons for that. Like I said in the review for King of the Monsters, it's not as good as the original, but it's still pretty good. And it is really, on an artistic level, a different culture's perspective on an existing story. So, we've got several more pages here, and I'm going to catch up to you with that in the next video, as I don't want to make this one too long. I want to hopefully hold people for this whole story, as it's very interesting. So, that is what we've learned so far from this booklet, and I'm gonna be filming the next bit of the book, like today, right now. But I'm gonna divide the video in two, hopefully to encourage as much people to follow through and learn as much as they can from this booklet as possible, because it, to me anyway, and I hope to some other people out there, very, very interesting. So we'll catch up later with the rest. Thank you very much for watching.